So welcome to the MMA election 2020, analyzing results and the manufacturing impact. So I'm Mike Johnston, VP of Government Affairs, Michigan Manufacturers Association, and I welcome you to our election preview. This is a Microsoft Teams live meeting, which means you will only see the four of us presenting, and you will only be able to ask questions through the chat function. We will absolutely reserve time at the end of the program for questions so that we can have some interaction with you all. That's a sort of a critical part of this presentation. So we'll be talking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll go to the chat room and begin to address the questions. So let me introduce our government affairs team, and I'll start with Dave Greco. We'll put him up on screen. He is the Director of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs. Next up is Dave Worthams. He is the Director of Human Resource Policy. And next is Brianna Mills, our Director of Political and Strategic Partnerships. So you got the full GA team here today to talk about the election. So we're going to talk about the national election, but really only as context for really what happens in Michigan. We have to spend a little time on national stuff because it's just not simple. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it continues to go on, but we're going to try and use it really as context for what's going on in Michigan and the impact on manufacturing and our manufacturing agenda. So let's jump to the national stuff. Let me open up with a couple of themes. The first theme is sort of observation we would have is polls really don't matter anymore. I mean, it's hard to put any faith in polls when they've been so fundamentally wrong everywhere in America, and certainly in the national polls. Trump did dramatically better than any of the polls would say, and maybe the underlying theme there is Republicans just don't talk to pollsters. I don't know. I think there's going to have to be a lot of analysis about why polls are so bad and so far off. The other interesting theme or observation I would share is that Republicans did fairly well down the ticket, despite the likely loss of Trump at the top of the ticket. I think he did very well. He did, of course, much better than polls anticipated he would. But Republicans did well across the country in the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, and of course the Michigan House. The next observation I would share is that Trump gained votes among minorities, which I think is very interesting, given the sort of vitriolic race issues going on in America prior to the election. Trump actually made gains. The NBC News reported that Democrats only picked up 80% of black men support compared to Hillary, who gained 82%, and Obama in his last election was 95%. So it's sort of interesting gains when there was a that much sort of race friction, I think, in America building up to the election. The other interesting fact is we all sort of saw in Dade County in Florida that South American immigrants flocked to Trump in great numbers. In fact, 21% greater than were Hillary. So I think that's just sort of interesting facts about what happened with Trump and in terms of themes along the way. Let's jump real quickly to the national results and the presidential race. We won't spend much time on this. It looks pretty clear, though not called, of course, but likely that Biden will win. The four states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, are trending very much towards Biden. So we would anticipate, though we certainly don't have the ability to call it, that Biden would win. But it's important to think about the context. So let's go to Dave Greco. Dave, how does the potential Biden presidency impact members of, issues going forward in terms of regulatory and environmental policy?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the opportunity. I guess I would say first and foremost, I think we've seen a lot of inroads under the Trump presidency and under Trump's administration when we're looking at the EPA. that'll likely go away. And to just give a little background or perspective, over the past year or so, MMA has participated with the EPA's Region 5 Administrator, Didi. We've also had meetings with our CEO, John Walsh, and the overall EPA Administrator, Wheeler, where they've really partnered with the regulated industry and manufacturers to talk about the great steps the industry has done to reduce emissions while also protecting economic competitiveness, which is a main message we've had for a long time. So we've been able to build on those relationships and partnerships, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Most likely, those inroads we've made in partnerships will likely have to be reestablished and rebuilt. And I think we'll likely see the sort of regulatory burdens that were removed under Trump's EPA will go away. I also think, and to give two sort of examples, specific examples, I would say is what we've seen in PFAS. The Trump administration's EPA has been taking a very deliberate approach to look at the science on PFAS to see sort of what are the health-based values should be and what are those risks and how do you balance that out. And they're making progress, some slower, in a somewhat slow fashion, but they're making progress on that. I think in a Biden administration, we'd likely see the EPA move more towards an approach that's similar to Michigan and other states at the state level, where they're looking most at who is establishing the lowest levels, looking at class basis rather than on individual compounds. So I think that's concerning for us. And I would also look at ozone emissions. We've been working very closely with the Department Eagle on seeking a 179BB petition, which is a but for international transport, our emission levels would not exceed the allowable level. I think the reality of that petition being approved under a Biden administration probably goes away. And that's unfortunate because we do have bipartisan support on that issue, especially at the state level. And I think we might see some other areas under the ozone emission levels sort of changing down the road. We continue to see them tick down from what is an allowable level. I think that's probably very likely that we'll see that under a Biden EPA as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Those are really important issues for us that we've been partnering really effectively with EPA, and boy, we're coming down to the wire. Well, we have lots of support from other organizations like NASA and other organizations working with us. Boy, we really need support from the Biden administration, and it looks difficult going forward. Let me jump real quickly to the U.S. House. It looks like pretty confidently that will remain in Democrats' hands, though interestingly enough, as I pointed out, Republicans have picked up seats, as many as 6 seats there. So interesting dynamic there, but Dems remain in control. The U.S. Senate is a more complex story, where we're in limbo, and I think until January with 2 runoff elections, the 2 Senate seats in Georgia. So that's kind of a complicated dynamic. Dave, what are the chances of Republican victories there?
Yeah, Mike, I think as of right now, those races are close. I think in addition to the 2 Georgia races, there's also the North Carolina Senate race. I think Tom Tillis is winning by about 100,000 votes, but they still have about 7% to calculate on that front. In Georgia, both races dropped below 50%, so I think those will end up in runoffs as well. You would expect those both to stay Republican seats. When you start to look at the other down ticket candidates that were in the initial race, the Republican votes outnumber the Democratic votes. So in a one-on-one race, I think the Republicans likely win. But it'll be interesting to see what happens in January and sort of what are the outcomes. If Biden does actually win Georgia, where he's up right now, that might see more money sort of funneled into Georgia and put those seats a little bit more at risk, since there'll be special elections in January and the country's focus will be on those 2 seats.
Yeah, fascinating. So, I mean, how important is control of the U.S. Senate by Republicans?
Yeah, I think it's sort of the last backstop, I would say, to full one-party control. I think when we're looking at it, the Democrats will be, if the Senate is held by the Republicans and Mitch McConnell remains the Senate Majority Leader, you'll see the Senate being that sort of backstop to avoid things like progressive judges being appointed. I think that's probably where we'll be looking most. Any sort of really progressive appointments will not be able to move forward under a Senate Republican majority. So I think what you'll see is actually probably some bipartisanship there, that if they want judgeships filled, whether it's at lower courts or other sort of administrative positions, they'll need to look to moderate individuals or individuals that are willing to work on both sides. So that could be helpful to us. And I also think likely what you'll see is that if things do continue to sort of be adversarial across the board, you'll see more cases working their way through the court system. And right now there is a conservative court across the country in most jurisdictions. So I think you'll see that sort of continue to be an issue of contention across the country.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think it's really important that we, focus on U.S. Senate, particularly from sort of a backstop perspective with the Democratic majorities in the House and, of course, in the president's seat. So thank you for that perspective. So let's jump to it, which really should be the meat of our discussion as a state association, and that is state stuff. So let me hand it over to Brianna Mills to give us some of the facts of what happened in Michigan. Bree?
Thanks, Mike, and it's so nice to be with everybody today. State of Michigan, the state house is really our focus. There wasn't an expert in the state who told us that the Republicans would maintain their majority, but that's exactly what they did. We are still at 58 Republicans, 52 Democrats. That's not to say there weren't any changes. Democrats picked up 2 seats in the House and Republicans picked up 2 seats in the House to land us right back where we started. As to which seats had flipped, our Democrat to Republican seats, the 96th district up in Bay City, kind of a stunner for Rep. Brian Elder, who was ousted by a very popular Republican, Timothy Beeson. And in the 48th, which is the Davison area, State Representative Cheryl Kennedy was ousted by David Martin. So a couple strategic plays by the House Republican caucus. As far as Republicans to Dem seats, the 61st district, that's that Kalamazoo County seat formerly held by Brant Iden. Christine Morse beat Bronwyn Haltom in a very competitive 50-50 district. And then, of course, Oakland County. There's such a huge focus on Oakland County and how that county has been trending. And the Kathy Crawford seat, which is the Novi seat, Kelly Breen beat Republican Chase Turner in another battleground, very expensive race. So in the end, House Republicans remain with their 58 to 52 majority. And of course, to the victors go the spoils. And so on Wednesday, we saw the majority elections take place. And we know that we will have Speaker Jason Wentworth out of Clare in 2021. We will have Floor Leader Ben Frederick out of Owasso. We have 2 assistant majority floor leaders, Ann Bullen of Brighton and Julie Calley of Portland. We also have our Speaker Pro Tem, who will be Pamela Hornberger out of Chesterfield Township, and a couple assistant Speaker Pro Tem, Sarah Leitner out of Springport and Brad Paquette out of Niles. We also know our House Caucus Chair for the next term. That will be Matt Hall out of Marshall. And then we will have our Caucus Vice Chair, Andrew Beeler from Fort Gratiot. And keep an eye on Andrew to land in leadership as a freshman. Really says a lot. And we know we have a majority whip is going to be Andrea Schroeder out of Independence Township. And the deputy whip will be Jack O'Malley from the north in Lake Ann. We are still waiting to hear who's going to be our appropriations chair in the House for next term, but we do know our minority leader is going to be Donna Lisinski out of Scioto Township, and our minority floor leader will be Yusuf Rabi out of Ann Arbor.
Good.
And that's the rundown.
Yeah, thanks, Bree, for the facts. It was interesting that the Democrats continued to put up their anticipated leaders in Donna Lisinski and Yusuf Rabi, but we kind of thought there might be a little bit of a shakeup there, but that kind of didn't happen. But Dave Wortham, let's go to you and kind of give some perspective. So what is continued Republican control mean for the MMA agenda, and what does it mean?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of continued support for our agenda. there will always be the politics of the institutionality at play. So you're going to have a number of bills that are passed by the legislature, pushed by the Republican leadership, that might end up getting vetoed by the governor. But at the end of the day, when the actual decisions will have to be made, we know that we will have some very good defenders for our industry coming out of the Capitol. I think you're also going to see perhaps a California-like situation where you're going to see a lot more initiatives that are presented to the legislature by citizens. I think you see some petition drives, and the importance in that is the fact that if you have a citizen initiative that goes to the legislature and the legislature approves it, it actually bypasses any opportunity for the governor to veto it. While she'll veto regular bills that will go through the regular process, the initiative is that end around, and I can see there being more of those if the relationship between Republican legislative leadership and the governor continue to sour. I think as the budget comes through, we will have opportunities to work with leadership to make sure that there's funding for Going Pro, that there will be continued support for Future for Frontliners and other sort of CTE support programs that we have promoted throughout the years. I think we will be able to really use the joint committee on rules process when there are challenging decisions, challenging rules that are made by the departments, whether it's Deagle, whether it's DHHS, whether it's MIOSHA. Being able to have that joint committee review, potentially reject those, or at least put in a 270-day pause as they go through that. I think that is something that we will continue to enjoy the support of in the 101st legislature.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think it is critical. I mean, on the rules process, given that the Whitmer has been very strong and proven that she's interested in using the rules process to her advantage. Be able to have the opportunity for the legislature to stop and to maybe even delay, particularly with that provision for 270 days, I think is critical for the legislature to stand up in the relative power balance between the legislature and the executive. So, yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that point. Greco, let's jump to you and talk about sort of the makeup of the Republican caucus. I mean, it's 58-52 still, but what does the election mean for the makeup of the caucus? You're muted.
Sorry. What I think we're going to see is actually a more conservative caucus. Just because if you look at the two seats that were flipped, the Republicans in Oakland County would probably be forced into being more moderate in their votes and in their approach because they knew they would have a tough election coming up. I think what we saw with Beeson and Martin is that sort of they rode that Trump wave, if you will, and they ran as conservatives. And I think that emboldens them to be more conservative, and then that emboldens the caucus to have a little bit more of a conservative bent. And I even think, too, if you look at the Oakland County members, those seats that switched the Democrats, I think as you've seen those Oakland County seats flip, you've had sort of moderate Republicans lose to more progressive Democrats. In each seat that the Democrats have gained in Oakland have moved towards more progressive members. So I think you're seeing sort of a further separation between the parties and going to more of the sort of fringes of their own ideological side. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it will be very conservative, and I think you see that from the leadership team. I think with Frederick, Wentworth, and Hornberger on that leadership team, they are very well-known conservatives within the caucus. I know Wentworth is Speaker-elect Wentworth is, while he's very conservative, he's very much about relationships, and I think he might be able to, being very pragmatic, he might be able to sort of set the tone with the governor. He was on the select committee to reduce auto insurance rates, so I think he'll probably be the person that has to go in with that relationship. But overall, I still think their agenda will remain very, very conservative.
Thanks, Dave. All right, Wortham. So Republicans maintain control of the House. The big question always is the relationship between the governor and the legislature. and there may be some cause for more controversy. But do you think it'll help or hurt in terms of maintaining Republican control?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that what Greco said about Wentworth being a pragmatist really will have an opportunity to shine through here. We know that the relationship between the governor and the Senate Majority Leader is very radioactive, and I don't think there's any way to salvage it. But when the quadrant gets together, and of course, the quadrant being the governor, the Senate Majority Leader, the Speaker, coming together, I think you're going to see that Wentworth will approach things in a pragmatic manner that will allow him to build a relationship with the governor. I can see the governor going to the House more so than going to the Senate when she needs things, despite the fact that the Senate has to approve her appointees from time to time. So I can see there being a lot of deals being made between the House and the governor for items on the budget whenever there's major legislative packages. I think Wentworth has an opportunity to build upon that and maybe even look long term in how the legislative relationship and the governor can kind of heal itself.
But so Wentworth is a conservative. Certainly Chatfield was a conservative. Do you think there's going to be a somewhat difference in approach?
Yeah, because I think Wentworth is a pragmatic conservative. He during his freshman year, he made a number of comments about, wow, this place needs some changes, and what did I get myself into? But he also took that as an opportunity to learn from folks who have been around on, okay, how do you bring back that successful, that efficient relationship between the administration and the legislature? And that, I think, while he is conservative and he will still sign off on a conservative agenda coming from the House, he will know when push comes to shove how to make the deal that gets you the 56 votes, that then puts pressure on the Senate to come up with the 20 votes. And because the House has already made the deal with the governor, I think the odds of her vetoing something that has been agreed to between her and Wentworth really go down. But without that, you're going to look at the same kind of fight that we've seen in the last 2 years.
Yeah, very interesting. So we've got Republican control next time. What impacts that have on lame duck? We certainly have some items on lame duck agenda.
Well, I think if the House had flipped, lame duck would be a very challenging experience for everybody involved, including our spouses who may not see us for 2 weeks in a row. But now that the elections happened, there hasn't been a change. I think lame duck will mostly be cat and dogs for those who are watching. Cat and dogs are the kind of nickname that the folks inside the legislature call the minor bills, the bills that really don't have a lot of impact. The minor bills you have to chase like a pack of cat and dogs. So I think you'll see some legislation that will change the sunsets for some of the COVID matters that were adopted before the October break. I think that's one of the reasons why the Republicans wanted to put those sunsets in, so they could revisit it in lame duck if there had been a switch and could immediately make their mark. But since there's no switch, I think you'll see those sunsets just kind of get pushed down the road to whatever time we think we might be coming out of the pandemic. I think there might be a possibility of a supplemental appropriations bill if we do get some federal stimulus money that comes back from COVID when the Congress gets together for their version of lame duck. So you might have to have an appropriations bill. You may have some other pet projects that people want to finish up on. One I can think of is the data breach notification bill that Representative Farrington has been working on for 4 years now. I could see her trying to get that across the finish line because that's in the Senate now, and wouldn't have to worry about a 5-day rule or anything like that. So, folks with their pet projects will try to get that done. Really, I think most of lame duck will be a chance for folks to put their final stamp on their legislative careers. Those folks who lost the primary, those folks who are termed out, maybe we'll see some entertaining farewell speeches like we had when Coleman Young was in office. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, good. So looking forward to next year. Committees matter. I mean, our agenda is dependent on our ability to get stuff out of committee the first set. We don't know much yet on committees. Dave, talk to me, Greco, talk to me a little bit about the process and when you think we might know.
Yeah, so normally the committee on committees process is a process where the speaker and leadership team will sort of select one person to lead this process, and then a group of legislators, future and current legislators, will get together and sort of negotiate out and strategize on what the committee assignments look like for the majority caucus, and then sort of offer up to the minority caucus sort of options to have people appointed to those or selected for those committees as well. That process normally goes on between the sort of Christmas break and into the new year. I think at the 2019 term, the beginning of the 100th legislature, members were sworn in on January 9th, that sort of first Wednesday, and then the following week they did committee assignments on the 16th. So we're probably looking at about halfway through the month into the process to see who's appointed to committees, or at least announced for committee chairpersons. It'll be interesting to see too, sort of what the outcome is for the committee assignments, because I think under Speaker Chatfield, we saw a significant amount of freshmen being selected for committee chairs. And I think there's probably a chance that'll happen again for certain committees. And I think that's always an interesting dynamic, because you have a new member that comes in and they get both inundated with learning the process, and sort of every lobbyist and association in town goes in and sort of has to have their meeting. So it'll be interesting to see who gets appointed, and then sort of how that impacts sort of strategies and partnerships going forward.
Mike, I think just to add on to that, I think Greco's right that the typical timeline is that you'll have committees coming out the week before the governor's State of the State address. As I'm looking at the calendar, the legislature comes in the 13th of January, probably puts the State of the State address somewhere around the 26th or 27th of January. So committees possibly that week. But I also remember during, I think it was Speaker Bolger's time, you didn't have committees organized or even meeting till the halfway point of February. So that's always a possibility. And I think there'll also be some discussions about whether or not the Ways and Means Committee continues. That was a committee that this time around was supposed to prevent bills being amended on the floor, because that was a pet peeve of Speaker Chatfield and his floor leader, Tristan Cole. And while I think the Ways and Means Committee did do some heavy lifting, you've still seen a number of amendments offered on the House floor, just because you might have something that changes at the last minute after a bill's been reported. So will Wentworth continue that? I don't know. I haven't heard any news down that way. If he does, then I think you see some freshmen in those big spots. But if Ways and Means disappears, I think Wentworth is pragmatic enough to put experienced people in chairmanships and put those freshmen in those vice chairmanships to get them their training that way.
Yeah, it's worth talking a little bit more about Ways and Means and what that committee was and what it was intended to do. So the Ways and Means was committee created under Chatfield and hadn't been in the Michigan committee list, maybe that first time ever. But the Ways and Means Committee is sort of a second check. So bills would go through the original committees, whereas the environmental committees or tax committee, or et cetera. Then it would have to go to the Ways and Means Committee as a second check before it made it to the floor. And I was always kind of amazed that the young freshmen didn't take offense to that, because it was basically the speaker saying, yeah, you can do goofy stuff at the committee level, but I'll catch you at the Ways and Means Committee and control you there. And there wasn't much pushback. Maybe that's freshman naivete. But I thought it was amazing that committee even existed. And frankly, we don't have any real insights whether it'll exist again. But it's in place because of term limits and the youth of the basic youth of the legislature. So very interesting discussion going forward on that. Greco, to follow up on some of your comments about sort of the freshmen and their youth, it's my opinion that term limits really shifts the balance of power to people like us. We've all been on staff. We are now the institutional knowledge. I mean, I worked there for a decade during the 90s. So, I mean, talk about institutional knowledge. I mean, we are the people that remember back decades when some of these people who are being elected weren't even born yet. So I think the balance of power in a term limited environment actually shifts to people like us with the experience inside and around the system. So just sort of observations on that.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. And if I can just too, I think you see not only is there's high turnover with legislators, but there's also high turnover with staff. So I think if you look back a decade or so, staff might have stayed in those important positions for a long time. And so when they looked to institutional knowledge, they were looking to staffers that were either working for those committees, they were in member offices, they were in leadership offices. Now with turnover happening, people don't even last a full 2-year cycle within an office or in a caucus position, that it really has completely shifted that power to outside associations and individuals, especially since so many people on the outside used to work inside the legislature and have that sort of institutional knowledge and background and relationships.
Yeah, so really good.
I think that's another fallout of term limits. You've got folks who are coming in here who don't know that they don't know. For example, one of the big lessons that was always shared with freshmen when they come in was, all right, you're here, do not hire somebody from your district. Don't bring your best friend up here to work, because now you're going to have to be the boss, and if you fire them, that's going to cost you their support, and who knows how many other people back home they'll poison when you try to get to that re-election stage. You've got a number of people coming up here who don't know that and don't realize that they don't know that, and when someone tries to suggest that to them, particularly if they're from outside the institution, they get ignored. And so we've seen an increased level of conflict on staff and increased turnover because of that. 10 years ago, back when you didn't have any gray hair, that sort of thing wouldn't happen.
I didn't know it was cheap shot hour. It's good to know. Game on, brother. All right. So there's another interesting dynamic going on in terms of a sort of stability of the legislature. 2 sitting senators ran for local offices. Pete Lucido won his race for Macomb County Prosecutor, and Pete McGregor won his seat for Kent County Treasurer. So what does that mean, Greco? What happens?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see potentially, I don't know so much on the Lucido seat. I think that one's still up in the air a little bit. But if you look at the McGregor seat, I think you're going to see some potentially current sitting House members look at that seat. You have Representative Huizenga, who's from Walker, and you also have Representative Thomas Albert, who is from Lowell, both within that Senate district that have an interest in it. And it's kind of an interesting dynamic, too, because at least back around October, November, those 2 representatives were sort of the front runners for the appropriations chairmanship if Republicans kept majority. So I think that's something that'll play out a little bit, is if they both run, they probably are sort of hurting their chances to be appropriations chair. If one runs and the other doesn't, that might pretty much solidify that spot for appropriations chair. And then you have a couple other former representatives running in that seat as well. But if one of them runs and wins, you now have another open seat. You have to have a special election. Not sure when that would be called, but then that has to be filled. So if you lose a member, you lose 2 to the 2 seats, you go from 58 to 56, which is a 1 vote sort of, all you have is 1 vote to lose there, or no votes to lose really, to get something passed unless you get some Dems on board. So it might make sort of the early parts of the legislature a little difficult to get things through if the Republican majority is looking to get some things done early on.
Yeah, but I think it's important to point out that those 2 leaves a very slim majority. The bare minimum majority in the Senate at just 20 votes. And it's up to the governor to decide exactly. when she sets those elections. Worthams?
Yeah, exactly, Mike. That's going to be the key, particularly, again, knowing that there's a sour relationship between the Senate Majority Leader and the governor. There is no mandate on when she has to call a special election. You've had some governors who want to call those real quick, and they'll have a 30-day special primary. 30 days later, you've got a special general. You've had other governors that want to do it on the regular election cycle. You've had some Engler-like governors who may have even pushed it even further and gone ahead and left the seat open for 18 months. just to keep it on the regular legislative election cycle. So it could be something that the governor uses as a not necessarily punishment, but something to really try to make the Senate feel heard her message. And the longer she drags that out, the more there will be a lot of shenanigans that can be played in the Senate.
Yeah, I think this is a very fascinating dynamic in terms of legislature's relationship with the governor, and particularly the Senate's relationship and the House's relationship, because it ends up being, the governor deciding which chamber is she going to leave sort of destabilized. If it's the Senate, she'll wait a long time she could wait 2 years. There's no limits, I understand, on when she could hold the elections. Or if she wants to destabilize the House and thinks she has more sort of flexibility there, she solves the Senate shortage by holding the elections early, and then watches House members go after those seats. So it'll be an interesting dynamic of really Whitmer's strategy in terms of her relationship with the legislature. If Shirkey continues to pound on Whitmer, maybe she punishes him first. I don't know. So I just think that's a fascinating sort of under the radar kind of issue that's occurred with these local elections. So great discussion. Thank you for that. Worthams, let's jump to another interesting subject, and that is, boy, this is the last election under these current district lines. This is we're kind of look over the horizon here beyond this current election. But it's important, isn't it? Because when we talk about the future of the Senate majority, would they continue to have beyond the Lucido and McGregor dynamic a 22 seat majority? So what does it look like? What happens going forward? What's going on with the commission?
Well, this will be the first time that we will have maps drawn by an outside body. Since 1980, there was maps that were drawn by the legislature once they've got the information back from the U.S. Census to determine how many congressional seats there would be, and then they would kind of go from there. And when you had situations where there was split power, the Dems would might write the seats for the House, and the Senate Republicans would write the seats for the Senate, or vice versa. Or even when you had times for united power, still you'd have the Senate that would make the push to design the congressional seats, and there would be charges of gerrymandering and unfairness and people being kept out of the system. And so a lot of that, I think, got behind and pushed the momentum of Prop 3 when it was adopted in, 2018, I think. And so what we'll see will be very interesting. So we've got 13 people that have been randomly selected, 4 Republicans, 4 people who affiliate as Republicans, 4 people who affiliate as Democrats, and 5 people who don't affiliate as any political party. And they've had a series of meetings already to try to get themselves organized, but going into next year, they have to have a number of town hall meetings or some sort of meetings throughout the state to take in information from people on what they would like to see the lines be, and they'll have to do some research on their own. But come November 1st of next year, they'll have to have new maps. So there'll be a lot of questions that they'll have to tackle. I think the first question they have to tackle is, what do the maps look like if we lose, actually not if, when we lose a congressional seat? Does that mean they now have to merge Fred Upton and Bill Huizenga and take a seat up the entire lakeshore? Does that mean they bring the District 1, which basically is all the UP in the top third of the Lower Peninsula? Do they now bring that further down south? And how will that impact Bergman if he's still there and wants to run again? That'll be I think the big first question that they'll have to face. I think the second question that they'll have to face or that they will quickly come to a realization is, you have so many federal laws and federal case laws that are on the books right now, that really the flexibility to draw lines isn't there so much in those Senate maps. Based on the census, based on that data, there will be a requirement for a certain number of majority minority districts. And by that I'm meaning districts that are majority made up by people of color, by minorities. And so that's why you typically see 1 or 2 Senate seats, maybe more, in Southeast Michigan. And you see a large number of House seats in Southeast Michigan. And you'll see that those are always held by African Americans or people of color, because again, that's the majority minority districts. And as you draw those lines, well, now that kind of looks like gerrymandering, but it's something that's required under federal law. Now you move out to the out county areas, the more rural parts of Michigan. Okay, now you have less people that you still have to figure out how to get 230,000 into a Senate district or 90,000 into a House district. You're going to have to, in some ways, despite what Proposal 3 said, you're going to have to cross some municipal lines. You're going to have to cross some county lines. Proposal 3 throws on top of all that you have to recognize special associations of people, cultural associations of people, which was never really defined. So I guess if you're a Dungeons and Dragons player, raise your voice and we can try to get you into a House district. But that's really going to be at play. I think the other funny thing that we've seen already is we've seen 2 of the appointees resign because they realized I don't really want to do this, or they don't have the time to do this, even though they're being paid a quarter of the governor's salary each. So will we actually still have enough commissioners at play who started the process and have learned what the laws are by the time we get to the end of it? There's a lot of questions to be answered, a lot of things that folks will have to experience. And then at the end, God forbid, if those maps really look bad and somebody decides to take it to federal court and the maps get thrown out, and suddenly Michigan turns into what Pennsylvania experienced 4 or 5 years ago, where they were working on the 2000 legislative districts because the 2010 districts kept getting thrown out by the courts. So who knows what's going to happen.
Great. Yeah, very interesting. Is it just looking over the horizon? Gets even more complicated. So thank you for that. Hey, Bree, we haven't talked about the Supreme Court yet. Give us some facts about what happened with the Supreme Court.
Yeah, the Supreme Court, we were watching, and we did have a majority flip on the court. In Michigan, it's all about the 2 top vote getters, which ended up being Chief Justice Bridget McCormack. So she'll remain on the court. And then the new addition is Elizabeth Welch, a Democrat out of Grand Rapids, who's currently an attorney. And so really a lot of focus on the court. It affects us more than we like, the Supreme Court. And so it was one to watch, and we are going to have a new majority.
Interesting. So I think it's an interesting question about the what does that really mean for our agenda with a switch in majority, given McCormack was Chief Justice. Greco, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably too early to tell a little bit, mainly because we had Chief Justice McCormack leading the court already, even though there was a Republican majority. So just looking at which cases actually get heard before the court was sort of within her purview before, and will continue to be within her purview. And it's hard to tell what the jurisprudence of now future Justice Welch will look like. Obviously, the Democrats, the Michigan Democratic Party endorsed her. So in theory, she would align very well with a lot of the Democratic causes that will go before the court. But we've seen that, the court is a unique beast, and it isn't always along partisan lines. And we've seen members that have been endorsed by, say, the Republican Party that have sort of gone the other way on decisions that might be not necessarily aligned fully with their own party. So I think it's probably too early to tell. I think on issues that are clearly partisan or overly partisan, we'll see a split where the Democratic majority will sort of hold together and hold true on those issues. But on a lot of issues before the court, I think it'll probably come down to the questions before the court and the facts of the case, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over time.
Yeah. Thanks for that. All right, Bree, let's talk about MMA endorsements and how'd we do? Right, we put a
Yeah,
lot of effort into it and talked to a lot of our members about where we ought to be endorsing, and how'd we end up?
Well, we do have a good process. We do survey these candidates. We talk to them. We interview them to see if they, in fact, will be a friend to this industry. And MMA ended up endorsing 69 candidates. 67 of those were House members or House candidates, and 2 were Supreme Court candidates. And actually, we did fairly well. We had only 5 of our endorsed candidates not win their race. So we had a 92.7% win on our candidates, and then just a 7.2% loss on our candidates. So overall, we did very well, and we're excited about all these individuals that we'll be working with in the new term.
Yeah, thanks, Bree. I think our endorsement process is a legitimate and important function that we do, and frankly, it starts out with a relationship building in terms of purpose. When we endorse candidates, we begin to get to know them in the elective process, and then when they get seated, they know us. They know we endorsed them, and it's a very important part of our relationship development process as we then begin to educate them on the very details of our legislative agenda. So anyway, I thought we did very well on that, and compliments to you, Bree, on your efforts there. But I think we're moving very much in the right direction with a brand new House majority. So let me jump to you all on the call and make sure that we're responding to what you care about. If you have any outstanding questions that we might have missed or maybe caused some questions, because I don't see any questions in the chat room. But
we do have a couple. So one we've got. What will be the biggest issues for the legislature next spring? Between divided government and COVID, they seem to be moving through so many fewer bills.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that. I think the friction between the House or the legislature and the governor, particularly over the COVID issue, I mean, there's a divide. And the Constitution requires enactment and presentation, sort of the full cycle, where bills go through the legislature and signed by the governor. If there is no agreement between the executive and the legislature, boy, guess what? You're not going to have much agreement there. So you're not going to have many bills signed. And I would sort of looking over the hill, COVID continues. I think the friction between the executive and the legislature will continue, and I think get more aggressive. I don't want to foreshadow too much and get into some subject, but DHHS came out with some new orders that will cause our members tremendous concern, and new strategies by OSHA on remote work in terms of enforcement will cause us great concern, and no doubt increase that friction between the executive and the legislature. So I don't want to get too down the weeds in that issue, but there would be my general response. There's friction.
Yeah, Mike, I gotta agree with you that the decrease in the number of bills, even the number of bills being introduced, is a function of the split power. This is just me pulling just from my memory banks, but I remember when we had united power in 2005, you had close to 7,500 bills that were introduced between the two chambers, because you had Senate bills, Senate bill numbered 1,500, 1,600. You had House bills 7,500 or so. So, and keep in mind that Senate bills start at 1, House bills start at 4,000. So you had a number there. When Granholm was elected, that number dropped to about 4,000. It went up again when you had Snyder in office. But this year, I think you're looking at just under 2,300 bills that have been introduced between the two chambers, and that is purely because you've got split government and you've got such a bad relationship between the governor and the legislature.
If I could, too, I also think an interesting perspective is, Republicans had all 3 legs of the stool for 8 years. So I would say a lot of the larger priorities they had were probably accomplished. And I think what you see is a lot more sort of constituent-driven legislation now, too, because there aren't these large priorities still out there, at least for the Republican caucus, that they know they can get done because of split power. I think if you saw the House flip potentially, even though you have split power, you would see a ton of bills move because you would see more Democratic priorities sort of start to get pushed through the House, put pressure on the Senate. So I think a little bit of that has to do with Republicans having so much or having full control for, almost a decade there.
Good. Let me jump to another question, though it just disappeared.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so next question. We saw Governor Whitmer shut down parts of the economy earlier this year due to the pandemic. With numbers rising all over the country, could a President Biden, should he be declared the winner, shut down manufacturing should he choose as a countermeasure? Does he have that ability, similar to the Defense Production Act?
So I'll take that. I mean, the the president has limited abilities to dictate to states on shutdowns of the economy. I think it's a valid question to ask in terms of what does it look like going forward with the rise of COVID and the sustainability of business in Michigan. I would say this, that the businesses that have been at risk, that is the restaurants and the theaters and the gyms, will continue to be at risk, not only from threats from government shutting them down or constraining their operation, and secondly, from their viability economically. Can you run a restaurant with half its capacity? I mean, I think there will continue to be problems in that sector of the economy. I don't see as great a threat to manufacturing. I think the governor recognizes, and frankly, this is kind of our work with the governor. She recognized that manufacturing is a critical part of our economic stability, and that the incidence of COVID within manufacturing are very, very good. Now, some of the data that Dr. Khaldun spouts about and causes us great concern, because somehow the way the data is put together, they put construction and manufacturing together. So when they say there's a problem in construction and manufacturing, and I've had long conversation with Sean Egan and MIOSHA, he agrees that the data it isn't right, but understands that most of the problem is coming from construction and not manufacturing. So I remain confident that there, at least at the state level, won't be a threat to manufacturing shutdown. Though, again, I don't mean to foreshadow and get too deep into what's coming next from MIOSHA and DHS. I think though we have some battles there, but in terms of categorical shutdown, I don't see it. Other questions? I'll read this one. Which Republicans do you think are most likely to run against Governor Whitmer in 2022? Good question. I'm going to leave it to the Daves and Bree to jump in.
Well, I've certainly, people definitely float Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey's name. Tom Barrett's name is out there, who is a senator, very impressive, flies helicopters for the military, has risen through the legislative ranks. But the question is there somebody out there that's not a full-on political type, a la Rick Snyder, who emerges? So I think we'll be watching that in the time to come.
Maybe we see another helicopter pilot in John James run if he
there you go.
Loses, right? I guess that's an option too. I think it's probably too early to tell too. I think it'd be interesting to see if Governor Whitmer takes, potentially, if Biden wins, does she go to join his administration? Mm-hmm. And what is the dynamic there? I think if she does join the administration, 2022 is a much different beast and possibility for Republicans. So they might look at different candidates. I think some of the ones we named, while might be good candidates, might not have the best shot necessarily to win. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I think James is probably the best option that the Republicans will have. If they can talk him into going at a statewide campaign a third time in a row. And I don't know if that frustration level has tapped him out or not. But I don't think Governor Whitmer goes. I think she, in many ways, still continues to overplay her hand. There was just a story that came out this week saying that she is declining any sort of offers or discussions about joining a Biden cabinet. And I think that's because early on, you might have had some discussions about the governor getting an invitation to be the USDHS secretary. And that's clearly something that she doesn't want. I think her eyes are looking at Attorney General. I I think she's trying to force her way or wiggle her way in there. And I think that's because her ego is not allowing her to look at the fact that Biden's already made that deal. He made that deal probably back when the last Democratic primary debate was made. So she's a little late to that game, unfortunately. So we'll see Whitmer running for re-election. And if it's Whitmer Shirky, good Lord, that's going to be bloody.
That's right.
You said it.
Well, that might be the right way to end this thing. After we have so much consternation and confusion going on at the federal level. I don't see any other questions in there. Dave, did you rob some questions from me that aren't appearing?
No, the only other thing we've got there is asking if we will send out a rundown of the legislative leadership, and our good producer Delaney McKinley has already answered that, saying that provide us your email address, and she'll be happy to send rundowns out to folks.
Yeah, we'll have that kind of information on our website, and we'll certainly have it available for you all for your consumption. So with that, I want to thank my crack GA staff. You did a great job, Dave. Thank you for your work, and thank you for the MMA members for attending. With that, we'll gavel it. Thank you very much.
Go Blue, go Broncos.